There are 10 big ideas that can help you dramatically improve your performance. In this episode of the Change Minds podcast, we're going to look at big idea books from the likes of Malcolm Gladwell, Adam Grant, Nassim Nicholas Taleb, to help you understand some of the most important big ideas that can help you to be able to perform at your very best. These are some of the best ideas that some of the greatest writers out there have written about how to ensure that you're optimizing your performance. In this episode, you're going to learn not only what those books are so you can study them more yourself, but also what the big ideas that lead to success are as well. So, looking forward to hearing how you get on. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Change Minds podcast. My name is Owen Fitzpatrick, and this is part of the Big Idea series, a series where each week I'm looking at a number of different big idea books. Big idea book is really a book that has a core idea that is challenging something in the status quo usually, or it's positioning a particular message that needs to be heard. So in this particular episode, we're going to look at 10 big idea books, which all are around the area of performance, high performance, success, that kind of thing. So we're going to be looking at some great authors, some of my favorite authors actually, that talk about different ways of thinking about how to become more successful, how to perform at your very best. And we're going to start off with the wonderful book called Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell. Malcolm Gladwell is, of course, a very well-known author that has written a number of books like The Tipping Point and Blink and Outliers. And in this particular book, Outliers, he really looks at what makes people successful. So he starts to unpack the reasons for people's success. And through a number of stories, he's one of the best storytellers out there. He identifies that success is not necessarily about individual merit alone, but it actually requires what he calls a cumulative advantage. This means arbitrary opportunities sometimes, growing up at a certain time. He talks about, Bill Gates, for instance, grew up in a time and was surrounded by the circumstances that allowed him to be what he ended up becoming. Cultural legacies make a difference. And Outliers is also famous for the 10,000 hour rule. And this is the idea that says that if you put in 10,000 deliberate hours into something of effort, then you will become really skilled at it. But I think the real highlight here is that talent is not enough. And sometimes we overly prioritize talent. We sort of say, the people who are successful is because they're just naturally gifted. And we really undervalue the importance of deliberate effort, deliberate practice. Notice it's not 10,000 hours of practice, it's 10,000 hours of deliberate practice from some of the research that he looked at. Now, Gladwell is famous for wonderful, engaging stories. It's a very enjoyable, very entertaining book to read. I definitely recommend it. It's called Outliers. And in the book, the most important takeaway, I think, is that we need to recognize the power of being surrounded by the right opportunities, taking advantage of those opportunities, and also the effort and energy we put in. So that's Outliers. Number 2 is the book Range by David Epstein. This is a really enjoyable book. He starts out talking about the difference between Tiger Woods and Roger Federer. Tiger Woods, from a very early age, was just totally focused on golf. His father got him totally focused on golf, and he just mastered golf. Whereas that's how we understand most of the time successful people. We think, oh, they're just amazing in that area, and they just focus all of their time, energy, and attention in that particular area. But then he contrasts that with the example of Roger Federer. And Roger Federer actually played a number of different types of sports before he sort of focused on tennis. And the argument from Epstein is that, counter to what we think in terms of there's one thing that you just focus on and that's how to be successful, Epstein argues that it really is about being able to figure out how you can be more of the generalist. And he says in complex, or as known, wicked type of complex, unpredictable domains, being a generalist actually gives you a lot more advantages because it gives you cognitive flexibility, the ability to look at things from a different point of view, the ability to have various different skill sets that can aid you. And in order for you to be successful, often generalists will have an advantage over specialists. And specialists, of course, are the people who just have narrow efficiency and narrow skill in one area. And so the idea is for you to perform more effectively, to work on a more diverse array of skills, to be able to ensure that you've got a wider repertoire of skills and practicing a number of different things as opposed to being locked into one way of doing things. Again, he goes into the research, he dives deep into it, so I definitely recommend Range. It's a very fun and enjoyable book. Next, we have Grit by Angela Duckworth. This is, again, a very popular book, and it fundamentally comes down to Duckworth's positioning that the key towards success is really about having grit. And grit is your ability to demonstrate two qualities, passion and perseverance. Passion being involved very much about what you want to achieve, caring massively about whatever it is that you're working on. And perseverance is the ability to get through the messy middle, the ability to keep going no matter what, to keep pushing through no matter how you might feel at the time. So the combination of passion and perseverance is really what predicts grit and allows you to succeed as well. Effort, in her way of thinking, counts twice. And so she's a sort of a calculation which works is talent multiplied by effort equals skill, and then skill multiplied by effort equals achievement. And so in order for us to bring our talent and, make it end up in achievement, we need two lots of effort. One, in order to put it into it, to turn our talent into a skill, it requires effort. And then to turn that skill into achievement, we also need effort as well. So effort is really something critically important if we are to be successful. The fourth big idea book comes from Simon Sinek. And Simon Sinek, known for his work around the importance of why and start with why and all that sort of stuff, Simon talks about what he calls the infinite game. And the infinite game is that in business and in life, it's not a finite game that we're playing. So in other words, once you've lived your life, you're either a winner or you're a loser. And once you've done this or that or the other, you're a winner, and that's how you'll always be. But it's an infinite game where the goal is to keep playing, and you keep playing in terms of business, you keep playing in terms of life. But when your attitude or mindset or perspective is as a finite player, where you're thinking, how can I beat the competition? How can I win this particular thing? And then that's it. Instead, he argues that that's not going to be a very successful way to succeed long term. Instead, what allows you to succeed long term is to become an infinite player. This is someone who's playing an infinite game, recognizing that there's not a clock on there. And the more that you work at being able to be driven by a just cause, again, not a million miles away from his notion of why, the more you're in there not just to win or to beat others, but to win from the perspective of this just cause that you're trying to put forward, the why that drives you, the more successful you're going to be long term. So in other words, instead of getting thrown into the world and assuming that you're playing this game to win each and every time you battle against competition, instead the key is that you're starting to look at, how can I ensure that I'm moving forward this important cause to me? I'm fulfilling my why, I'm fulfilling my purpose. And that's something that you continuously do. You play the infinite game, which is a great idea as well. The next is The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel. Very good book, really well-written book, extremely popular. And in it, he talks about some of the most important mindset shifts we need to have around about money. And he talks about how financial success is not a hard science in terms of with rules. It's more like a soft skills connected with psychology and behavior. Doing well with money is little to do with how smart you are and how intelligent you are. There's a lot of really intelligent people that aren't necessarily very good with money and vice versa. And so it's really about how you behave. And the hardest part from his perspective is trying to get the goalposts to stop moving. So in other words, learning to be able to define enough. A few episodes ago, I talked about, Sahil Bloom talks about financial wealth as being really largely about knowing when you have enough. And that wonderful anecdote about Joseph Heller and his book Catch 22. And he's talking to his friend, Kurt Vonnegut, and Kurt says to him, the owner of this party or the person who's hosting this party has made more money in a short space of time than Catch 22 your book has in its entire existence. And Heller responds, well, I have one thing that he'll never have. And Kurt says, what's that? And then Joseph Heller says, the knowledge that I have enough. And that notion of being able to define enough so goalposts stop moving, that's a critical component towards it. But there's lots of great tips in it. It's really well written, as I said, very engaging book, The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel. Number 6 is to our friend Adam Grant, a wonderful professor from Wharton, who talks in this book about originals. And in originals, he looks at creative people who tend to think in new ways, think in different ways. And he sort of looks at some of the positive benefits of, for example, procrastination. Whereas sometimes we have a tendency to see procrastination as a bad quality, in terms of sometimes originals, and these original thinkers tend to be really good at being able to leverage it. So in other words, procrastination actually helps them to be more original. And originals aren't gamblers, right? They're not reckless in that way. Instead, they hedge and mitigate risk. So they procrastinate strategically in order to give them the space to be able to consider things. And they increase the odds of them being successful by generating a lot of different ideas and then rigorously testing or championing the best ones. And that's a mentality that allows them to succeed. So once again, from a performance perspective, from a mental creativity perspective, Originals is an excellent book to read. He also represents, again in this list, for his relatively newer book called Hidden Potential. And in this, he talks about how we overvalue innate talent, again, as sort of a nod to the Outliers, or even to a degree the Range. But we overvalue innate talent and we undervalue what he calls character skills. This is proactivity, this is discipline, this is determination. And in many ways, this is very much aligned with what the Stoics say, and what Ryan Holiday talks about as well, is that so often we focus on the things that don't matter as much as really character does. And if you look even at Stephen Covey in his book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, he does talk quite a lot about the importance of character and working on yourself and working on those kinds of qualities. And so when you work on your proactivity, your discipline, your determination, it allows you to be able to start to pay attention to the growth that you have. And the key is that the distance that you travel in terms of your growth from where you started matters a lot more than where you start. So the key is to notice that you're making momentum and to have a sort of a mentality around being okay with imperfection, right? You need to tolerate flaws in order to keep moving. Be okay and comfortable with the fact that you won't always get everything perfect. And again, this touches on the growth mindset too. So Hidden Potential is an excellent book as well. Antifragile is the next one, and Antifragile is something that I've used a lot over the course of the last few years, quoting this book by Nassim Nicholas Taleb. In it, Taleb's quite goes into detail and stuff like that. So he's written a number of different books, some really great ideas, talks about the black swan, for example, and has a lot of different ideas in this space. So very, very successful in the way in which he creates ideas that have an impact, a real impact from a big idea perspective. Then Antifragile, the notion here is that something that's fragile breaks easily under stress. Something that's the opposite of that isn't resilience, but is anti-fragile. In other words, it gets stronger as a result of being exposed to stress. So examples would be your immune system, the muscles of your body. When you go to the gym, you expose them to adversity or stress. And as a result of that, they grow back bigger. They break down first, then they grow back bigger. The economy as well, whenever there's a problem with the economy, it actually makes the economy stronger. Your reputation, your character in many ways is anti-fragile because, once again, the toughest times will often make the toughest people. And so these are all examples of it. And you want to avoid this notion of, focusing on just safety to avoid any kind of challenges or any kind of problems. Instead, you want the chaos, the challenges to make you better. In many ways, when Ryan Holiday wrote the book, The Obstacle is the Way, which again is connected to Stoicism and that notion from Stoicism, well, antifragility is very much like the obstacle is the way. In other words, the challenges that we face actually make us better, actually make us stronger in the longer term. And so the key is for us to begin to start to ask ourselves, how can we start to leverage our challenges, leverage the toughest times we have such that we can become stronger, we can become better, we can become more effective as well. Then we have Flow by Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, and this is one of the classics in the area or field of positive psychology. This talks about how happiness is not a state of relaxation. It's a state of being in the optimal zone, in what he calls a flow state, where your skill perfectly matches the challenge level. So this is when you're doing something really hard, but you're really good at it. And when you're doing that, it requires you to sort of get into this flow state. When things are too easy, and you're really good at them, well, that can often lead to boredom. When the challenge level is hard, but you're bad at something, there's a huge gap, and that can really make you sort of disappointed with yourself. You can lose confidence quite quickly and lose motivation as a result. And so what we want to be able to do is find ways to challenge ourselves in the areas with which we have a lot of skill. And when we can find those areas, we'll be experiencing the flow state a lot more of the time. And that's really what Csikszentmihalyi talks about. And that's why it's such a classic, critical idea in the area of psychology. And finally, we have The 5 Types of Wealth by Sahil Bloom. A few weeks ago, we did a deep dive into this book. I encourage you to check out that episode. Definitely buy the book. But this notion from Sahil is that we tend to over-index on the importance of financial wealth in determining our success. What we really need to do is recognize that in order for us to be truly wealthy, we need to have time wealth. And this means focusing on the fact that our time is finite and we need to make the most of the time that we have and apply the important skills and the important techniques and the important tools that we have at our disposal to ensure that we're making the most of the seconds that we have. We're allocating our attention in the right kind of ways. We're controlling our time and ensuring that we're not allowing it to slip away from us. From a mental wealth perspective, it's important for us to ensure that we're learning and developing and growing to the best of our capacity, and we're being driven by our purpose. From a relationship standpoint, or social wealth as he calls it, it's important to recognize that the depth of our relationships, the breadth in terms of having more loose ties of our relationships, as well as the earned status, are all ways in which we can enhance the quality of our social groups and our connections with others. And then there's also the physical wealth. So some of the fundamentals there obviously are exercise and movement, sleep and rest and recovery, as well as the food that you eat. And he emphasizes the importance of ensuring that the financial success that you have, and he gives tips on that as well in terms of the money that you can earn, in terms of lowering your expenses as well as investing. Makes everything really clear and simple, but emphasize the importance of balancing it all if you truly want to be actually wealthy. And he means wealthy not from a purely financial perspective, but the 5 types of wealth are critical to that. So it's really about balancing all the different areas to the best of your ability. So we have, in terms of the 10 big ideas for high performance, we have, of course, Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell, the importance of the 10,000 hour rule, 10,000 hours of deliberate practice, and putting yourself in positions or situations or contexts where you can avail of more opportunities is really a great way to be able to succeed there. The book Range with David Epstein brings us to the notion of ensuring that we become more generalists, not just specialists, because that will diversify our skill sets and help us to be more excellent, especially in uncertain worlds and challenging circumstances. There's also Grit by Angela Duckworth, where the key is to embrace a passion and perseverance and the ability to keep going even when it's tough. The Infinite Game by Simon Sinek, where he talks about this notion of recognizing that we are playing an infinite game. We're not in a finite game where there's rules and once it's over and you either win or you lose. Instead, we're constantly working on that, and we see it in the long term as something that we're constantly always doing. There's also The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel, where the real critical key here is that it's so often about the psychology and the behavior that you need to be able to engage in order for you to be successful. And a large part of it comes down to recognizing when enough is enough. What does enough mean to you so that you can experience a feeling of being wealthy from that perspective. Then you've got Originals by Adam Grant, where he talks about the importance of using procrastination as an opportunity to be able to generate lots of ideas, seeing things differently, testing the ideas and championing the best ones so that you can ensure that you're creating more opportunities and not seeing procrastination always as bad, but sometimes it can serve as a strategic way of helping us to generate more ideas and come up with different perspectives. There's Hidden Potential by Alan Rand as well, talks about the importance of our character skills as opposed to our innate talent and measuring our growth in terms of how far we've come as opposed to where we started. Antifragile by Nicholas Taleb, whereas the hardest challenges we face actually are the very things that can make us stronger and more, as he calls it, anti-fragile. Flow by Cixin talks about the importance of tackling the things that are particularly difficult, but that were really good so we can enter that flow state. And finally, the 5 types of wealth. So we start to balance our physical wealth, our mental wealth, our social wealth, as well as our time wealth with our financial wealth for us to truly be wealthy. So in this episode, I hope that some of these ideas are sticking out. Please do go check out the books, deep dive into the ones that seem the most enjoyable and most interesting to you. And it will help you, as I hope this episode has helped you, to think in terms of ways which allow you to optimize your performance and to become even more successful than you already are. Thanks very much. If you like this episode, spread the word and let more people know. And for now, take care. And may the force, as always, be with you. Bye-bye.